Early today, it was announced that the Whanganui River in New Zealand will be granted its own legal identity as an individual. The river will. That's the culmination of a nearly 150-year-long legal battle between both advocates and Maori tribes in the area with the government. And there's been a number of elements of this, of course, it's gone on for over a century. The preliminary approval for this individual identity for the river actually came several years ago. But now we have not only the actual final agreement, but also money that is going to be used to protect the area. So under the claim settlement bill, two people are going to act and speak on behalf of the river. They'll work to promote and protect its health and well-being. The government and the Iwi, those the local Maori tribes in the area, will pick the two individual representatives. Treaty Negotiations Minister Chris Finlayson said that the tribes in the area fought for recognition of its relationship with the river since the 1870s. And what's that?
That's amazing.
That has been going on for that long. It's the longest running legal battle in New Zealand right now. I would assume longer than in most other countries as well. They have another quote from that negotiations minister saying, Awa Tupua, that's the name that they have for that particular river, will have its own legal identity with all the corresponding rights, duties, and liabilities of a legal person. I know some people will say it's pretty strange to give a natural resource a legal personality, but it's no stranger than family trusts or corporation or companies or incorporated societies. And obviously we've had our own battles with that in the US as well.
So yeah. What duties does a river have?
Well, flow, baby, flow.
Flow, baby, flow. To quote Mitt Romney, this is what first came to mind for me: rivers are people, my friend.
That's the first thing I thought.
That's right. So let's just note for the record that you guys just said that the duty of the river would be to flow. Okay, so at first I read the headline. I read the headlines and I thought, well, I don't know, this seems a little silly. So that's my perspective talking, and that's because I'm not a native of the Maori people, and I haven't been fighting on this since the 1870s, and I didn't view it that way. But when I read into it, and especially the quote that John just read, I thought, that is kind of interesting. I mean, what's more of a person, a river or a corporation? I would argue neither one of them are a person, but a river is much more alive than a corporation is. So point well taken. And second of all, that's the thing. That's why diversity is interesting, because if we didn't allow for that diversity and we just ran over this tribe, or New Zealand did, I would have never had that perspective. They do. They think that it's a part of their existence and their lives, and that it has its own spirit in a sense.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating. It's not my perspective, but it's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, so the tribes there have like this very personal relationship with it. It's obviously a spiritual relationship. And so I read up on some of the history with this particular river. It's the longest navigable river in New Zealand. It has over 200 rapids, and they're obviously very physically interesting in terms of the geography. But the way that this particular river is woven into their culture and their stories about individuals and their relationship with the river is very interesting. And at one point, that was the area along the banks of this river is where the majority of the tribes in that particular area lived. And then you had colonization, and as in so many other areas, they were displaced from large areas, and that is one of the things that gave rise to all these legal challenges. Now, partly in response to those sorts of challenges, you also have monetary compensation. The current bill that just was finalized today includes $80 million in financial redress and an additional $1 million as a contribution towards establishing the legal framework for the river. The Crown will also contribute $30 million to a contestable fund for looking after the river's health. Now, in not too many years ago, there was a volcanic eruption. As a result of that, water from a local caldera, poisonous water, leached into the river, killing a large amount of the wildlife there. And so this money that's going to use to protect the health of the river is not just because of man-made problems, there's also natural problems sometimes that come as well.
So this is apparently a huge part of native cultures across the world, including here in America. We had the water protectors at Standing Rock who viewed that water as sacred. And again, coming from the industrial world or what, I don't know, however you want to characterize it, I think like water's water, right? On the other hand, making an argument that water is life is a far more persuasive argument than the arguments that are made today about how these laws are life. Laws, not laws overall, but laws regarding, again, corporations and incorporated entities and legal trusts, right? A legal trust is not a person, and water has got a much better claim because look at what happens when you poison the water. The life around it dies. And they have a saying, the Maori people do, I am the river and the river is me. So they view it as personal. And if you're part of many different cultures who believe that we're all one, whether it's the Taoist culture or the Transcendentalists or the Sufis, that makes a lot of sense to you. And finally, from my perspective, at least what it does this in practicality is it gives a representative to the river to protect the river's interests. Again, legally, that's pretty interesting. Maybe the river's interests should be protected.
Yeah.
And especially if, as a society, you're not doing a very good job of it.
Yeah, and obviously very different culture here in the US. We use very different language for things, including natural resources. But if you really think about the way oil executives, coal executives, and the Republicans that they've bought talk about natural gas and talk about oil, talk about coal, and how important it is to our business and our advancement, our culture, how people's entire area can have that one big industry. The way they talk about those natural resources has a spiritual component to it. And so I don't think it's all that much of a stretch, even if the particular language we use is somewhat different.
I'm certainly no expert in the legal system in New Zealand, so I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but I find it a little peculiar that there was no way to afford this river protected status without assigning it personhood status. Like there must have been some fix available there without getting into this weird metaphysical territory about like what constitutes a person. And maybe it's just, and my sense is that it was done out of deference to this animism. So the religious beliefs of these particular tribes people. And I don't know, the cranky secularist part of me is just like, this seems sort of nonsensical. I mean, why are we giving credence to these silly conceptions of what a river can constitute metaphysically? Again, I'm all for legal protection for a river that is sacred and that has been very central to the doings of this tribe for millennia potentially, but I don't know, the idea that we have to broaden our conception of a person in order to achieve that seems a little weird.
So I think that what they're driving at is that the water is not as protected as it should be. And it's certainly the case here in the US and apparently the case in New Zealand. I hear you, I'm deeply secularist, deeply agnostic, so as much as I enjoy Taoist philosophy, I think Taoist religion is totally wrong like every other religion. And so I see the water protectors up in North Dakota and they're praying nonstop and that's wonderful and peaceful and I really appreciate that, but it's not for me. I don't believe that prayer works. So, that's our opinion. And so do I agree with their religious philosophy about the water? No. Do I appreciate that they fought on behalf of everybody's water? Yes. And do I think that we have our priorities a little wrong in society? And hence, as John points out, when conservatives here in America say like, now why do you think the good Lord put that oil underneath Texas if he didn't want us to take it out, right? I think it's not such a bad thing to balance that out with a spiritual argument in favor of water, because as a fan of ours just actually put together a video where they quote, I think Mark Ruffalo and Shailene Woodley, saying, I think it was Ruffalo who said, oil's great, sometimes you need oil, but you can't drink oil. Water's a little bit more important. So if this culture emphasized the water, even in a way that I disagree with, ultimately, philosophically or religiously, hey, at least they won in protecting it, so God bless, if you will. Support independent media and get the whole Young Turks 2-hour show and other network shows all ad-free, tytnetwork.com/join. Come join us today.